Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Digitizing Hidden Collections, Amplifying Unheard Voices final application webinar. In order to circumvent any issues that we may have had with weather or production, we've pre-recorded a short video for you that we will then follow live with some questions from the applicants. So thank you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first webinar for applicants invited to submit final applications to CLEAR's Digitizing Hidden Collections, Amplifying Unheard Voices program this year. I'm Louisa Kwasigroch, Managing Director at CLEAR, and I want to congratulate you all again on making it to this stage of the application. It was a competitive initial application round, and each of your proposed projects made a positive impression on our review panel. Today's session will give you an overview that will orient you to the process of turning your initial submission into a competitive final application. We're going to start off with some introductions, first to this platform and then to our team. To begin, we want to share some notes about using Zoom during this session. A live transcript is being generated if you'd like to utilize it. To turn on this feature, click the CC Show Captions button at the bottom of your Zoom window. Attendees will be muted throughout the presentation. However, you're welcome to use chat for general introductions and conversation. If a chat box isn't already displaying on your Zoom screen, you can hover your mouse toward the bottom of the screen and open it manually. To send a message to everyone, remember to change the default from hosts and panelists to everyone. Please use the separate question and answer feature to ask questions. This can be opened the same way as the chat box. Because we have limited time together, please feel free to follow along with questions as they come in and upvote them to let us know that it would be helpful to you to have them answered live. We will do our best to answer all the questions live, but we will also share responses to all questions alongside the recording. This session is being recorded. The slides, questions and answers, recording, and transcript will all be available on our website's Apply for an Award page in the next 2 weeks.
Our team would like to center today's conversation by acknowledging that as residents of the United States, we are speaking to you from unceded land of many Indigenous peoples. I'd like to respectfully acknowledge and recognize the original and current caretakers of the land, water, and air where I live, the Shawnee and Osage peoples, and all of their ancestors and descendants. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on their homelands and ask you to join me in acknowledging all Indigenous communities, their elders both past and present, as well as future generations. May this acknowledgement remind us of our shared commitment to beginning the process of working to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. CLEAR's work is accomplished by a relatively small staff of about 20 geographically distributed individuals. Today's webinar is led by the grants team, which administers CLEAR's active re-granting programs, offering support for the entire grant cycle from application to final report. Some or all of you may know us from webinars or from email exchanges, but we'll do some quick introductions. Sharon Burney, Program Officer, located in Midlothian, Virginia. Alyson Pope, Program Officer, located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Jane Larson, Senior Program Associate, located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Lizzi Albert, Community Relations Manager, located in Washington, D.C., and Louisa Kwasigroch, Managing Director, located in Chicago, Illinois. This is the first in a series of sessions that will provide guidance and advice to those preparing final applications. Over the next 40 minutes or so, we will walk through the final application, including the updated application guidelines, and touch on what the review process looks like. We'll share details about the resources and support that are available to you over the next few months, and answer any questions that you might have at this point. We will take some time now to introduce the expanded application guidelines and walk through the tasks required in the final application.
The Apply for an Award page you used for your initial application has now been updated for the final application phase. The website has all of the most recent resources, including templates for many of the required uploads, so be sure that you are using those resources. As we mentioned, the recording, slides, transcript, and questions and answers from this webinar and future ones in this series will also be posted on the Apply for an Award page within 2 weeks of the webinars taking place, so you can reference them later. As in the initial application phase, your primary resource for the final application will be the application guidelines. This has been completely updated to provide instructions and insights for this phase of the process, integrating some lessons and advice we've learned from the initial application phase. The guidelines also serve as a space for you to draft responses to questions prior to adding them to our online grant platform. A view-only Google Doc is linked to from the Apply for an Award page. Users without a Google account can access this version and download the document in whatever file format they wish using the File menu. For those with a Google account, you'll also find a link to create your own copy of the document where you can work on answers directly. Be sure you are referencing the version dated February 19, 2025. Included in the introduction to the guidelines is an outline application overview, showing at a glance the difference between the initial and final application and what questions or uploads are new requirements. The online application section in the guidelines includes accessibility information for the structure of the document, including the formatting and hex codes for important text. The final application is designed to build upon your initial application and asks you to expand on your earlier responses as much as possible, allowing you to import and edit them instead of completely rewriting information you submitted to us in October. The project details sections of the initial application are expanded with a combination of form responses and document uploads. The application guidelines addresses each task in much greater detail, but will cover a few important points today.
The first task asks you to reconfirm the eligibility you indicated in your initial application of your organization, any collaborating organizations, and your project. Additionally, this section now adds the conditions of award acceptance, including the requirement to sign a grant agreement, to dedicate any metadata and software that you create to the public domain, with exceptions for culturally sensitive metadata, and to claim no additional rights on digital files that you create. These details are also available on our website and in the guidelines. As a note, this year we will only require documentation of nonprofit status, such as an IRS determination letter or equivalent proof from organizations nominated for funding. So that does not need to be included in your application at this time. The final applicant information task offers you the opposite option to pre-populate the fields with all of the information supplied in the initial application. This will be especially useful for any projects that involve collaborators, as you'll be able to skip re-entering all of that data. If you do choose to have the system auto-populate this task, which we highly recommend, you still have the option to edit all of the fields. For example, you may have reevaluated your collaborators or changed who might be serving as your principal investigators or PIs. Those changes can be made and saved. This task is exactly the same as in the initial application. No new questions have been asked. The guidelines include additional instructions on what you'll encounter in the system, but do let our team know if you experience any issues making your desired edits, and we'll be happy to assist. In the final project overview task, you'll notice many of the fields already populated with responses from the initial application without you needing to do anything. All of these fields are editable should you need to make any adjustments. For example, many applicants may have more information about project costs or expected timeline. Feel free to edit the size of the request or project length in line with the program's guidelines. We know and expect that some of this information will have changed since your application was initially submitted. And as you are preparing your application, be sure to double check that the numbers and dates you enter here match the work plan upload and budget documents. We've refined our instructions for budgets in the final application phase in line with what will happen once funds are awarded. Please note that all requests should be made in US dollars. Projects that are led by Canadian organizations will then receive funds in Canadian dollars based on the exchange rate at the time of the award. Now in the task is a brief reflection on the adjustments that you've made to your proposal based on the reviewer comments you received, anything you learned during the webinar series, or changes that occurred in the time between your initial and final application submission. This will help the review panel to understand these changes clearly and orient themselves in their assessment.
The final application is designed to help you connect with our program's core values at every stage of your application. The application guidelines include specific instructions and insights to help you develop your responses, with reminders about how each component of the application relates to these values. As we continue our overview of the remaining components of the final application, we'll also highlight how the core values might relate to each task. In the materials task, you're asked to expand your initial response about the materials you are nominating for digitization. The information you supply here should start revealing how your proposed project supports the program's core values of public knowledge and broad representation. But you'll also go into much greater detail on these values in the next task. Our reviewers will look to this section to understand the physical materials, their condition, type, scope, and quantities. This task includes 2 uploads. The first is a list of collections, which should be supplied on the spreadsheet template that CLEAR provides. This will provide a high-level overview of the collection or collections that are included in your project, any existing descriptions, their general condition, material types, how much of the collection will be digitized, and any rights or access restrictions that might apply. You will have an opportunity to explain more about those rights or restrictions in the rights ethics and reuse task. For some applicants, this list may only have a single collection entry, while others may have dozens of collections included. Our team is happy to answer questions as you complete this requirement. The second upload is your representative samples. Final application should include at least 3 and up to 10 samples that will help the reviewer see the types of materials you propose to digitize. We find that looking at these examples helps reviewers develop a more concrete understanding of the value of the materials and why your approach to digitization is the right one given their unique characteristics. To support the list of collections, the application also includes a question asking for the total estimated quantities of materials that will be digitized by the type or format of the original. For example, while your list of collections might include 3 collections at different organizations that include a mix of manuscripts, photographs, and artifacts, in this question, you'll provide the best estimate of the total amounts of manuscripts, photographs, and artifacts you propose to digitize. The application guidelines includes additional instructions on this question. In our 3rd session on March 19th, we'll go into greater detail about assessing collections for digitization. After you've described the original materials, the next section asks you to tell the story of these materials. This task builds on the first and should support the program's core values of public knowledge, broad representation, and authentic partnerships. Where the materials task answered the question, what will be digitized? This starts answering the whys. Why now? Why these materials? Why this program? The task includes 2 elements. Expanding your initial response to the prompt, whose voices will this project amplify? And uploading at least 1 and up to 4 external letters of support. Together, these materials should help the reviewers understand the voices represented in your proposed project, the potential impact on the various communities represented in the materials and involved in the project work, and the partners and relationships that you've already established. More so than any other section of the application, This gives you the space to share your passion with the reviewers so they're as excited as you are at the prospect of digitizing the proposed materials. The external letters of support should help build your case and will be an extremely important component of the reviewer's assessment. These should not be confused with the internal letters of commitment, which we'll cover in a bit. Letter authors may include members of communities represented in the materials and any others who will use them for public programming, research, teaching, learning, or other journalistic or creative work. Do not include letters from individuals directly involved in the project or who would benefit financially should the project be funded. We recommend starting to solicit these letters now to give plenty of time for your letter writers to respond. The application guidelines on our website include additional resources to help you solicit the most compelling letters. We recommend you share clear guidelines for letter writers, as well as details of your project so authors can provide strong, relevant letters specific to your application and proposed project.
In the Rights, Ethics, and Reuse task, you'll be providing much greater detail on any legal or ethical concerns that need to be considered related to the included materials, as well as any restrictions you may plan to help facilitate community-centered access. The task begins with a series of checkboxes that should reflect any rights or access restrictions that you indicated in your list of collections upload. You'll note that several restrictions, such as watermarks and the charging of fees, are strongly discouraged by the program and must be specifically and strongly justified in your narrative response and optional appendices for this section. Even when no restrictions are expected, applicants need to explain why this assumption has been made. This statement should not be generic organizational language, but rather tailored to your specific project and the materials being nominated for digitization. As noted, this task does allow for the upload of an optional rights, ethics, and reuse appendix. Applicants may want to include donor agreements relevant to the collections, policy documents that provide additional explanation, or other documents that support the claims made in the narrative. This is especially important for those materials that do have access restrictions due to legal or ethical concerns. Session 2 of this event series on March 12 will include more details and conversation on rights, ethics, and reuse related to digitization projects. The Project Details Outcomes task asks for more information about the intended outcomes of your project and the audience you aim to reach. In this section, continue to show how your proposed project supports the core values of public knowledge, authentic partnerships, sustainable infrastructures, and community-centered access. After expanding your initial response, you'll be asked to respond to 2 additional prompts. The first is providing the quantities, formats, and specifications for the unique preservation quality digital files you will create over the course of your project. This response should correspond to the quantities and formats of the original materials that you supply in the earlier materials task. The guidelines includes detailed instructions on completing this prompt. We also include additional resources on our webpage, such as the DLF Digitizing Special Formats Wiki, for anyone who may be new to digitization project design. Since a primary priority of this program is creating community-centered access to fuel the creation and dissemination of digitized special collections and archives as a public good, you'll also be asked to provide at least 1 and up to 10 portals where users will be able to access the digitized files and the related metadata. The guidelines includes additional instructions, especially for those of you who may be creating new portals for access. In this section, you may also want to consider how you can create links to other related collections and include portals that aggregate collections or metadata as best suited to the unique content of the proposed materials. Session 3 of this event series on March 19 will include some more information on determining the best digitization outcomes for an achievable, sustainable digitization plan. The work plan upload is perhaps one of the most critical components of the final application and an opportunity to show how all of the program's core values are integrated at every project stage. This upload should include the basic information that a project manager would need to know on day 1 of the project to set the team up for success. The requirement combines your presentation of the schedule of work with all of the activities, individuals, organizations, and technology you plan to use along the way. For collaborative projects, you'll want to show the engagement of the partners and where work may happen concurrently or branch off. Rather than supplying separate work plans for each collaborating partner, this document should illustrate the holistic plan for the entire project, indicating differences in staffing or equipment at the various organizations as necessary. For those engaging with communities or advisory boards, be sure to show where and how they will be integrated into your project development and work. Additionally, all applicants are asked to provide brief, no more than 250-word statements on risk mitigation measures you will implement and how you plan to address delays should they arise. Your team's assessment plan for measuring and documenting your progress and determining success at the conclusion of the project, and how the project deliverables, including technical infrastructure and specifications, will be made secure, usable, and discoverable for the long term. The application guidelines contains detailed instructions on this upload requirement. We've also supplied an optional template for your use or just to get you started. Session 3 of this webinar series will also be useful to help inform your completion of this task.
In the capacity task, you'll be sharing more about the capacity and strengths of your team, both those you have and those you hope to build. After expanding your initial response, you'll be asked to provide 3 uploads. The first is supplying a letter of commitment from a head administrator of the lead applicant organization, and if applicable, each collaborating organization. In the guidelines, we provided examples of who the head administrator might be, since this person will likely vary depending on your organizational structure. Essentially, you'll want the letter to come from an individual empowered to make a statement of your organization's commitment to support your project. For collaborative projects, you should upload each letter separately, and you should have as many letters as you have collaborating organizations. As with the external letters of support, we recommend that you start soliciting these letters now and provide your letter writers with clear guidelines for letter writers. Details of your project will also be useful so authors can provide strong, relevant letters specific to your application and proposed project. Next are resumes or CVs for each of the named project PIs, which are allowed up to 3. And other resumes, CVs, or job descriptions for key project staff, either existing or new. In this section, you must provide at least 1 and up to 5 uploads. The guidelines include additional instructions for the uploads, including specific instructions about the inclusion of salaries, wages, and fringe benefits for any job descriptions that will be covered by award funds. For large collaborations, especially, we know this limits your ability to celebrate all of the individuals involved in your proposed project. We recommend highlighting any additional key personnel involved in your work plan and possibly linking to their resumes in the document, and using this space to focus on PIs and new hires. In all of these requirements, reviewers will be looking for evidence of why this is the right team for the project you proposed, how you are engaging with your broader community, and how the staff and support structure of your organization clearly show broad representation and authentic partnerships. And finally, for the last task, asks you to reflect on the need for support through this program. As with the work plan, all of the core values should be infused throughout the components of this task. Applicants are asked to expand on your initial response, answering why you need support from this specific program. We refined this question a bit and expanded the instructions and insights to help guide your response. Rather than providing general language about the need for funding, reviewers will look to see evidence of why the mission, values, and priorities of the applicant organizations align with the funding priorities and core values of this program. Your response should state clearly why the activities included in your proposal cannot be supported by the applicant organization. For collaborative projects, be sure to explain how external funds from this program will be distributed equitably to support authentic partnerships between all involved organizations. Next, you'll supply a budget detail on the template that CLEAR provides. This shows a line item summary of how the award funds will be spent according to 8 defined allowable budget categories. The guidelines include additional instructions on completing this template. All funds should be requested in US dollars. For projects that are awarded funds, you'll be able to use the same document for budget reporting throughout your project. Expanding on your budget detail, you'll also supply a budget narrative. We provided a budget narrative template to help you develop this upload and be sure that you're supplying all of the necessary detail in this document. While the use of that template is not required, it may be useful to reference. All expenses should align with the allowable costs of the programs detailed in Appendix A, Budget of the Application Guidelines. If you plan to include cost share, those should be included only in the budget narrative and clearly marked as cost share so reviewers know exactly what will be covered by award funds. As a note, cost share is not a requirement of this program. For those who may be using vendors or other service providers with a cost greater than $5,000 US, you are required to upload estimates or quotes to support the costs included in your budget documentation. Each upload should be accompanied by a brief justification for your selection of that vendor or service provider. If your organization has a policy against selecting a vendor prior to the award of grant funds, explain this in the available description field and select a tentative choice to support the estimated costs listed in the budget detail. It may be useful to reference CLEAR's guidelines for grants involving consultants or subcontractors for more information on soliciting service provider proposals and quotes. And that's all of the tasks. Once you've completed all of the required tasks in the online system, you'll have the option to review and submit your proposal. This gives you one last chance to look over everything that you've written and uploaded and go back to edit any errors you may spot. Once you are confident your application is complete, click the Submit Your Application button and click Submit again if prompted. Once submitted, you'll see your application in the My Application space and be able to download a copy for your records. A confirmation email will be sent from the SML Apply system. Be sure to check the spam folders if you don't see that within 24 hours. The grants team is always happy to answer any questions about the application submission process. The deadline for submission of final applications is 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on May 5th, 2025.
As in the initial application guidelines, we've provided a rubric for the assessment of final applications. The final assessment will allow the reviewers to rank applications more granularly on the core values of the program. So keep in mind those connections we've made today and look for the markers we've provided throughout the guidelines to be sure you are clearly communicating how your project embodies all 5 core values. All applications will be read by at least 3 reviewers and an additional IP reviewer focusing on rights and ethics. We do our best to keep the review process consistent between the initial and final round, so expect that at least 2 reviewers will have read your application in the initial round. CLEAR has $4 million to award in this round of funding. The number of awards made will depend on the size of the individual requests, but based on our historical data, we estimate funding between 12 and 25 projects. In our last section, we'll talk about some additional resources and support as you move through your final application writing. Our first resource is this webinar series. Each session will cover topics identified in the review of the initial applications as potential areas of concern needing additional support. We've planned this series to flow with how you might work on your final applications, but we welcome you to work on your submissions in a way that best suits you and anyone helping with this process. While none of the webinars are required for a submission, we strongly encourage engagement with the process as we work to offer you practical tips and suggestions, time to start drafting responses, and space to ask questions. We'll drop the link where you can view and register for each of these sessions in the chat. We also encourage you to invite members of your project team to register for and attend these sessions. For example, you may want to invite whoever will be working on your budget detail and budget narrative, such as a grant manager, controller, or finance manager, to attend session 4 on staffing and budget. We hope this support series will be a benefit to you all, something like a continuing education course in digital project design and competitive grant writing. After each webinar, we'll invite you to complete a survey to collect your feedback on content in the overall series to help inform our continued assessment of the program.
The next session will be on Wednesday, March 12th. Sandra Enemo, Program Director for Scholarly Communication and Information Policy at Yale University Library, will be presenting. We'll drop the link where you can read more about the series and register for any of the upcoming sessions in the chat, and we will send a reminder email about upcoming sessions halfway through the series. Please remember to check out the additional resources on our website if you need guidance on specific components of your application. We've mentioned our guidance for letter writers and proposals involving subcontractors or consultants, and we also include information about CLEAR's indirect cost policy and other information that may be helpful. We'll be posting the recording and slides for each upcoming support session to this page, as well as a sample grant agreement. We also offer a few general resources about rights statements, digitization project design, and digital preservation, which may be helpful.
We're going to get into the questions now. If we run out of time to answer all of your questions today, we'll be sure to provide written answers in the Q&A doc that will be posted alongside the recording. And please note that we'll be holding a full hour-long session dedicated to Q&A on April 9th. We want to make sure that you're clear on one varying difference from the slides today. We've changed our guidelines to require the use of CLEAR's budget narrative and budget detail templates this year. So as you get ready to start with the questions, please, if you can, put them in the Q&A doc, and we may not always answer in exact order, but we'll try to answer as many as possible. Okay, we're going to look at the first question, Alyson.
Give me one sec. Okay, here we go. Will full proposal reviewers be able to see scores, comments from the initial panel review? Typically, we assign you to the same review panelists whenever possible. And so not only will they be able to see your initial application and initial application feedback, they're generally the same panelists that reviewed your initial application and provided that feedback. So yes, they have access to those materials and they are typically the same people.
What format can the representative samples take if the materials are films that have not been digitized? Do photographs of the reels and perhaps some frames meet the requirements? Yes, they do. A lot of times people will give us photographs of the collections in the canisters. Yeah, it's whatever you can do to show them that these are the collections and this is the state they might be in right now. Sometimes they're boxes. Yes, it can.
Regarding the presentation of the resume or the job description, which resume should I include regarding the job description? Should I only include the title of the position and the job description, or should I include something else? So in terms of resumes, you're going to want to include resumes for your PIs and any other key project personnel you may already have in place. So if you have like an archivist or a digitization librarian who isn't a PI but will be working on the project, you would want to include a resume for them or a CV. In terms of job descriptions, those apply to positions that you'll be hiring through the grant fund. So like generally we're referring to contract people that you're bringing on for the grant term. And we would want to see the full job posting or as close to the full job posting as you would have prepared by the time of the end of the call for proposals. So we would want to know the title of the position, but also details relating to salary and responsibilities.
What is the likely time frame for finding out if the application is awarded a grant? The review panel meets mid-July. We hope to let you know, everyone know, the status of funding sometime in August.
Will we be able to receive a copy of the slideshow? So we will post all these materials on our apply for an award page, including a PDF of the slides that'll have the speaker notes included. So you'll be able to download the PDF from our apply for an award page. We always give ourselves 2 weeks to get those up. We tend to get them up more quickly than that.
What is the difference between a collaborative organization and a partner organization? And should we list partners as collaborators on the application form? An official collaborative organization has to adhere to the eligibility requirements. They must be a cultural heritage organization. They must own and hold the collections that are nominated to digitize. You would also be, they'd be having a very prominent role in the project, in proposal. And you would likely share funds with this organization in an equitable way. Partner organization may be an organization that you are doing some work with substantially in the community outreach or to hit some of your core values. Sometimes Indigenous organizations are partner organizations because they're providing information on the collections and assisting with the protocols that you're going to utilize for your outreach and your project. They wouldn't be necessarily a labeled official partner or collaborator, but they would be listed in your outreach and authentic partnerships part of the application process, if that makes sense.
Is it okay to increase the award amount we are asking for based on feedback from reviewers? Yes, we expect to see changes from the initial applications to the final applications, particularly to give space for applicants to address reviewer feedback that can be related to the amount of award funds you're asking for, the length of your project, the scope of the number of deliverables you want to deal with, anything of that nature. We do expect to see some things change. We just will still need you to be within the bounds of the program guidelines. So you cannot ask for more than is allowed in either round.
In my initial review, there were suggestions on reaching out to previous associations who received CLEAR in previous years. I would love to do that, but not sure where to locate contact information for them. First place I would start would be on our funded projects page. We have a list of past grantee recipients, and if something, a project looks like one of the organizations that they recommended you reach out to, then you would be able to find them through their institution. If not, please send us an email at hiddencollections@clear.org, and we'll be able to help you find those people for you.
Can you send detailed instructions on how to get an application template that has our prior application responses included where appropriate? I'm not clear how to find that. So we do not have individual application templates created for every project. We just have the guidelines, which is the overall application template for everyone to use. However, you can go into SM Apply and access your initial application. So you would be able to download that from within the system, and you would then need to either copy and paste those answers into the template you're using, or you could just leave those template spaces blank because they would be populated for you in SM Apply. This may be more obvious if you look at the actual application in the system. So I would recommend that you log into SM Apply. I think it may be more clear what we're saying here.
We applied last year and were not selected. Can we use the same letters of support or do they need to be updated? That's a subjective answer. If there were no comments from the reviewers stating that your letters of support needed more substance, or you needed more letters of support, then I would use the same ones from last year. Yeah. Or, maybe there may have been suggestions from the reviewers that you weren't clear on the outreach and scholarly impact of your project, then you might reconsider using different letters of support. But otherwise, I don't see anything wrong with that.
When the feedback is slightly contradictory, what should we do to update our response? It's sort of hard to answer that broadly. But what I would say from our perspective as people that read all the comments from the panel, typically contradictions in panel feedback indicate a lack of clarity in the application generally. Usually one, in my experience, usually one or both of the panelists is misunderstanding. So I would say to adjust the project in the way that you feel best fits your unique project needs, but also look for ways that you maybe could elucidate or clarify elements that perhaps cause some confusion to lead to the contradictions. Sharon, you're muted, sorry.
Thanks, Alyson. If awarded a grant, when would the funds become available? As we said earlier, the notifications will go out in August. After that, we have to sign grant agreements, which takes a little bit of time. We pay the grant out to the applicant organization in full. And your project is supposed to start in January, so we hope to have your funding to you sometime by October or so. That all depends on how quickly your organization signs the grant agreement and we can get those processed.
Is there a minimum number of community partners required for the project? No. All of you have completely unique collections. Many of you are from different types of organizations. And what it's going to take to build successful projects for you is not always going to look the same. Some of these are very large in scope, intersectional in voice, and it's very hard to build a proposal like that without pulling in multiple perspectives. But some of you have more in-depth collections that are perhaps more specific, and you would not need necessarily a wide range of partners beyond your organization and your organization's expertise. So there is no kind of benchmark at which we would say we are not seeing authentic partnerships here. That would be based on the specific needs around your materials.
Applying from Canada, it's a bit tricky to budget given the drastic changes in the US and Canadian exchange rates over the past few months. Should we choose what looks like a reasonable average for the current period and peg all of our budget figures to that rate? Yes, that's a great solution to that. We expect these fluctuations. If you get funded, you know, we're gonna always go with the US rate, the US dollars that you put in your budget detail in your project acts. And if there are if there are great fluctuations and you have extra funds, you can always alleviate that by doing grant modification requests to use the outstanding funds for sometimes more materials can be covered in the digitization process, maybe your outreach. That will come up in time, and we will always have a way to handle that for you.
Yeah, if it's okay with you, Sharon, I'm going to say a little more about that just because we changed. We just enhanced the
The budget template.
Canadian budget templates in response to some feedback from previous Canadian grantees about confusion. So when you do your proposals, you'll want to pick an average rate in or around the date that you applied. For your reporting, if you are awarded, we would use the exchange date at the time that the funds are dispersed to you. So your reporting moving from then on will be based on that. You would actually report actual Canadian dollars spent, and then that exchange rate will be used to translate your report back into US dollars for us. But we do understand there's been a whole lot of fluctuation in these rates right now, and we know that they will change.
Well, I'll just go ahead and do this one. Can the application include the cost of having a student worker assess and prepare material? This activity would help clarify which items would be digitized. Yes, you can add that as a staffing line. Just be aware that we do not fund tuition waivers of any kind, and clarify in your budget narrative or in your project narrative who will be supervising the student workers. The reviewers like to see that we're not putting to, and make sure that you also give them fair, equitable wage for where you live and you're located.
If the grant award includes hiring contract staff, I think that was supposed to be staff, sorry. Would we be able to begin the search in late fall with an anticipated start date of January? Or do we need to wait till Jan 1 to start the hiring process? So as Sharon mentioned, we try to notify everyone in August, and then there is a follow-up process during which time we have to get all the grant agreements signed. That can be sort of a lengthy process, and it usually resolves sometime in October. Once those are signed, we move forward on our end with a press release announcing the funded projects. We will have a more pinned down date for that, but I would guess that would happen sometime between mid-October and early November. And once that has been put out, you can then make your own announcements and post your own job postings. So we just ask that you do not communicate any of that externally, including with job postings, until we have made our official announcement of the full cohort of awards.
May we include in our budget honorarium/consulting fees for experts in curriculum development? Yes, you can include in your budget honorariums and consultant fees for experts, as long as they're not for any disallowed costs, which you will find in Appendix A of the budget, allowable and disallowed costs in the guidelines. Curriculum development's tricky. We would need to know more about what you plan to do with that. Make sure when you're creating your budgets that you are primarily focused on digitization, and then hitting the core values of each, the 5 core values required, and substantiating how these fall within those categories in your budget narrative in detail. The Reviewers will want to see that your explanation and justification backs up your project proposal and the focus of this program. Do you have any more questions?
There's one new question in the chat, I think. Oh, two more.
Oh, there we go.
If we plan on having a community advisory board, could a member of that group write our letter for support, or are they too involved? They're probably too involved, particularly because you're likely to, it's likely that you're going to pay them, or perhaps extend an honorarium or something of the like to them. And folks that receive funds through the grant are not eligible to write letters of support.
Is the cost of quality controlling captions acceptable? Is that what the QCing is? Yes, okay. Thank you, Lizzie. Yeah. We can do transcription and quality control transcription. Once again, as always, you don't want it to be excessive. It has to apply strictly to the digitized content. Make sure that your budget, and we're going to have ongoing applicant support webinars where we can get into the details of some of these areas. So I would recommend making sure that you're at our budget and staffing webinar that's coming up. See, you will have started your applications, and some of these things will have been worked out and tweaked a little more, where you can ask more specific questions. Yeah. There's a couple more questions coming in.
There's some urgency to our project now that NARA records are threatened by changes in Washington, D.C. We're having to move to protect files as soon as possible. Will this compromise our application? No, I don't see any reason why this would compromise your application. We have had grantees partner with these institutions in the past, including through COVID when there were similar access challenges. So the panel has a historical perspective on these kinds of issues. I don't think it would be a knock on what you're trying to get done.
We see description as a key aspect of digitization and have budgeting for cataloging. One of our reviewers had questions about metadata costs as part of the digitization cost. We'd still like to include this as part of our cost. Should we just provide more explanation in that section about description costs? Yes, I would recommend being as detailed as possible in the justification of this increased spending that needs to be done about your metadata costs. I'm not sure if you're using, you're digitizing in-house or you're using a vendor. If you're using an outside vendor for this, let them explain why these things need extra, these are extra costs that you may need to pay for. Yeah, the more explanation, the better for the review panelists, and they'll say, oh, well, that makes sense now. Oh, there's a follow-up to your question.
In other words, if some of the documents we are looking to digitize are obtained before Our official grant application is moved through the process using volunteer networks, etc. Is that okay? I don't see why not.
Some of the document look at the jar obtained before has moved through the
Like
process
moving some of those materials.
to a different organization or
No,
something.
they're not our materials, right? And they're digitizing them. So I guess you're saying trying to move them from NARA and into your process sooner. I don't see why we would preclude you from doing that, but we also obviously can't guarantee that you will be funded.
Oh, she said your grant decision-making process. No, it does not.
Mm-mm.
And I will say this, that our review panel are extremely experienced and have their ear to the ground and are very open to the external issues that may arise for any collection. So we have all our confidence in our review panel.
Question is approximately what % of applications received will be funded? I think the max percentage we could look at. Let me see. Sorry, I'm bad at math.
I think we were trying to fund probably about anywhere from 12 to.
But that's coming from the initial applicant pool. So for this applicant pool,
Yeah, we're still looking
I
at.
think our highest funding rate could be 42%.
Yeah.
It's a range, obviously, because of the broad range of the
Project.
amount that you're allowed to ask for in this program and the size of request asks.
We have a few more minutes. If you have any more questions, if not, we can move on to the last slide. Please don't leave yet. Okay. So thank you for joining us today. Don't hesitate to send any questions our way to hiddencollections@clear.org as they come up between now and May 5th, the application closing date. If you have a moment, we're dropping a survey in the chat and would be glad to get your feedback about how this session went and how we might improve. And thank you. We hope to see you at the next session or another session soon.